Uh-oh. Sounds like somebody's got a case of the Mondays.
You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted. Broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Monday, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio Podcast, presented by BuckeyeGrove.com. Ohio State football talk and Ohio State basketball talk coming at you here this show. We've got Kirk Barton and Ross Wilton will be joining me here in just a few minutes as we break down Ohio State's 36-31 win over Nebraska. And it is also game week. Ohio State basketball launching its 2018-19 season as the Buckeyes travel down I-71 south to the rival that is not a rival, playing the UC Bearcats to open up the season Wednesday night, 6 p.m. on ESPN2. This is a game I'm very much looking forward to because it is a rivalry that has never been a rivalry, and I wish it would be, but I will talk a little bit about that game here later in the show because I am excited for basketball to roll around. And Ohio State, look, I don't know if this is going to be an NCAA tournament team or not, but it is a young team. It is a talented team that has a high ceiling. It's not a national title contention type thing, but it's a team that could sneak into the NCAA tournament, and if everything goes well with development, they could wind up being a very, very good basketball team next season when they get those 3 top 50 players coming in DJ Carton and E.J. Liddell and Alonzo Gaffney. So very good days ahead for Ohio State basketball, but in the meantime, they will be tipping the season off Wednesday night, 6 p.m. at Cincinnati. You can watch that game on ESPN2, and I will talk about that here in a few moments. But first, we have football talk, and before I bring in Kirk and Ross to break down what happened with the Ohio State-Nebraska game, I have a few general sentiments that I want to talk about. Look, I know people are concentrating and focusing so much negative energy on the fact that Ohio State beat a 2-6 football team by 5 points, and now 2-7 with that loss accounted for. But look, I'm here to tell you something. This Nebraska team, just throw out the record for a second, because first and foremost, this Nebraska team is actually better analytically and statistically than Indiana, Minnesota. And that's kind of relevant because we're looking for things to pick apart that we can say Ohio State improved, okay? There was so much worry about the Ohio State running game, and guess what? Weber and Dobbins combined for 8 yards a carry and 254 yards, okay? That's a step forward because they ran for like 3.7 yards a carry and a combined 100 yards in the past 2 games against so-so run defenses in Minnesota and Purdue. So first and foremost, Nebraska, not a good run defense, but still, 250 yards is 250 yards. 8 yards a carry is 8 yards a carry. So you could say that they improved there. Defensively, Nebraska, very good offense. They were averaging 520-some yards a game coming in. And like I said, it's because this is a better Nebraska team. All the power ratings, Sagarin, ESPN's FPI, which is Football Power Index, S&P Plus, which is one of the best ratings out there, they all have Nebraska as a better team than Indiana and Minnesota. When you look at scoring margins and who the teams played and the context of the games, the opponents, all of that factored in, Nebraska is a better team than Indiana, Minnesota. That's just basically to say they would be expected to be favored over Indiana or Minnesota on a neutral field. So this is important because it means that, again, the progress you saw on Saturday from the defense, not giving up big plays, making Nebraska work for it. They had 450 total yards, but that's under their season average. And for an Ohio State defense that was giving up so many big plays, I thought this was a somewhat encouraging performance. You saw a little bit better play up front. The defensive line controlled the line of scrimmage more, averaged just under 4 yards a carry, which is not great, but it's not bad. You saw better linebacker play. Guys were taking better angles. I thought Malik Harrison played a good game in coverage. Baron Browning is starting to come along slowly. Just progress, right? That's what you're looking for. And safety play. Jordan Fuller goes down early in the game, and with that targeting call, which I'm not a fan of, and I'll talk about that with Ross and Kirk if I remember later. But I'm not a fan of that call for a number of reasons. But were you like me when you're watching that game and Jordan Fuller gets out and it's like, oh no, right? You had to be thinking worst case scenario. The safety play has already been so bad with Jordan Fuller being their best player back there at safety. And then he goes out and you're thinking, this is going to be a disaster waiting to happen. But hey, Brendan White steps up, plays a really good game. Sean Wade, I think, played a better game. Suddenly there's some hope now with if what we saw out of Brendan White, who looked like a real football player. If there's some light at the end of the tunnel, I think. You saw small baby steps, okay? And is it enough to make this Ohio State team a legitimate threat to beat Michigan and then win the Big Ten title and then get into the college football playoff and somehow knock off Alabama? I'm sure right now that's a long shot, okay? Doing all those things with this team as it is, it's a long shot. But the good news is, even though it's late in the season and time is running out for them to improve, they have enough talent that if they can get some of these things clicking in the next couple of weeks, all they have to do is get hot. And that's what happened in 2014. Ohio State wasn't necessarily clicking the entire season in 2014. They had that great game against Michigan State. They just kind of tread water for a couple weeks. They were able to do enough to beat Michigan. JT Barrett got hurt, but then all of a sudden, when Cardale Jones comes in, everything just exploded. They blow out Wisconsin, they dominate Alabama, and then they blow out Oregon. And all those things were a culmination of many things, but it was talent and little things coming together. And I don't know that this team has the kind of talent that it can put things together like that 2014 team did. I'm just saying, right now, we're looking at this group, this personnel, we're looking at things that might show signs of improvement here down the stretch, and they're going to need it very soon because this Michigan State defense is very, very good. It's a top 10 type of defense, and Michigan, in my mind, is the second best team in the country. I think it's right there with Clemson behind Alabama, and they're playing really well. And don't get me wrong, I don't think what Michigan is doing, I think Michigan is a better team than Ohio State, and I don't think that matters come November 24th. I think Ohio State only has to be better on November 24th. It doesn't matter what happened prior to that point. So I'm not trying to say that Michigan is going to beat Ohio State because that I don't think matters. Whatever has happened to this point in the season is not going to matter in 3 weeks from now. But Ohio State just has to be in a position. I'm not sure that they have as much margin for error, but we're just looking for little things that will carry them through the rest of the season. And I thought we saw some things, okay? You have to squint a little bit, but, it's a talented enough team. It's a top 10 team with the talent alone. So if things start coming together with this talent, Ohio State, look, this kind of offense, if they can get the run game going, they're an explosive team. They're the type of team that can put enough points on the board to beat an Alabama or a Clemson because they have so much playmaking ability. So all they need to do is get in the ballpark and show improvement here the last couple weeks. Win the game, show improvement, get themselves in position to get to the football playoff, and then anything can happen. That's all I'm saying. I know some people have said, when I'm talking about the analytics, Nebraska being a better team, and people want to focus on this 2-6, now 2-7 record of Nebraska, and they want me to ignore the statistics and analytics and concentrate just on what they're seeing because it's like, well, it's a 2-6 team. I'm asking people to look beyond, look deeper than Nebraska being 2-6. Because if you just say, well, I'm just going by what my eyeballs see, that's a very slippery slope. And I'm going to use an analogy here because, think about, way back when people thought the earth was flat. It made sense, when you look, your mind cannot comprehend. You can't see the curvature in the earth. So when you look out on the horizon, it looks like the earth is flat. So if you go by the approach, well, I don't care what the statistics say, I care what I can see. Well, that can get you in a very dangerous position because you can't see everything. You can't go in depth and comprehend everything that is going on. Even if you're seeing it, you're not processing everything that you're seeing. And when push came to shove, we found out the earth was not flat, okay? Science, statistics, it just didn't support the theory of, well, you're seeing a flat earth, but it wasn't really flat. And I feel like that's the same situation here. You're not seeing, you're looking at a 36-31 win against a 2-6 team, and you're like, well, that's not cutting it. That's not improvement. But you can't just go by what you see on the surface. And that's why analytics and statistics, while they're not perfect and they don't tell the whole story, they give you a bigger, broader picture of what's really happening. And I feel like against Nebraska, turnover margin, which, by the way, is very fluky. Ask the turnover chain. Miami last year, they were, plus 14 on turnovers, and this year they're like plus 3. And that difference, with basically the same personnel is because turnovers are fluky. And Ohio State was a victim a little bit of turnovers against Nebraska. And so if what you're seeing is true, it will be backed by stats and analytics. And I'm not saying you should go be really excited because Ohio State beat Nebraska and looked better, that therefore they're ready to win a national title. I don't think that's the case, and I have my doubts as to whether that's going to actually happen. I just don't. I think the odds are stacked against Ohio State right now. But right now we're just looking for things we can cling to, things we can grasp, that we can see and back up with stats and analytics. And I think that there were some signs on Saturday, for the first time in several weeks, where Ohio State showed maybe a glimmer of hope and just a little bit of light at the end of that tunnel. So, again, I'm not saying that because Nebraska is better than Indiana or Minnesota that this was a game that you should be really excited about and suddenly back on the bandwagon. This is a national championship team. Rah, rah, rah. But I'm just saying that you got to go by more than just what you're seeing. You got to analyze it and put it all together because this is not a flat earth and you can't see the curvature in front of you, but it is there, okay? It's ever so slight. It's just way off in the distance. And so that's how I'm treating this. There's some upside here. I like where Ohio State is at if they can get by this Michigan State game, because then I think they've got another week to work on things against Maryland. And then you go into the Michigan game, and it really is just, fight for your lives. Just come out with the win. It doesn't matter if you improve or not. Just win that game any way you can, and then you're in a position to, I think, control your own destiny and clinch a playoff win if you get into the Big Ten title game and then win that. Because if Ohio State beats Michigan State and Michigan and then wins the Big Ten title with one loss, they are not, in my opinion, going to be left out of the playoff unless something really freakish happens, like Alabama loses to Georgia and has one loss, and Notre Dame wins out, and Clemson wins out, and Oklahoma wins out. Then you're talking about a scenario where you get into a situation it gets a little murky, but most likely all of those things are not going to happen. The probability of all of those things happening is very slim. So Ohio State is in a position, just keep improving the next couple of weeks, win the games, and then you just never know. Okay, you play the games, and you don't know what's going to happen. Anyhow, that's my rant. Let's look a little bit more in-depth to this game now with Kirk and Ross. Guys, how you doing?
Doing pretty well. It was another game with some promising things and more things to clean up.
Kirk, how was your weekend and your first observations of what we saw over the weekend?
Today actually is my birthday, so I'm celebrating my birthday by doing a podcast, which is the best thing I think I've ever done in my life. But I I'm just glad Scott Frost doesn't have his guys yet, because I mean there were some times yesterday I was at the game and I was watching, I was like, man, he has some great concepts. Oh my God, I was watching them on offense, I was like, Jesus. I mean, his stuff is, if there's like if I'm starting as a coaching staff and there's an offense I want to copy, it's Nebraska's, because man, they got some stuff where they just had guys scot-free, and his stuff's just really good. I mean, I was really impressed with Nebraska. I was glad that we won. We just have better players than they do, and I think our O-line took a step, and thank God we finally ran the ball for decent yardage, and it was all in all, it was positive offensively. Defensively, we're still figuring it out.
Well, Kirk, happy birthday, and I make you a promise I will not break out in singing to you today for your birthday. That would turn off a lot of listeners.
No. You'd be great, man. You'd be fine.
Yeah, you haven't heard me yet. You won't hear me because I don't want to subject anyone to that. I would echo, first of all, before we get into the crux of the game, I want to echo what you said about Nebraska. Adrian Martinez is going to be a stud. It's funny because I saw this discussion. I don't know if you guys saw this. Matt Jones of Kentucky Sports Radio was basically like, talking trash to Nebraska fans that have been, tweeting at him over the commitment of Wan'Dale Robinson to Kentucky. And he was basically talking trash about, like, don't you see, Nebraska was 2-6. You can see why recruits don't want to go there. And as, like, Kentucky is all of a sudden, like, college football paradise or something. But I just said something on Twitter the other day. I'm like, you know what? Let's revisit this in 3 years, because I have a feeling, have a really good feeling that Nebraska will have more wins over the next 3 years than Kentucky will, because I don't care what has happened so far this year under Scott Frost's first year. With Adrian Martinez there, I think he's going to have that program. Yeah, he may not have it back to where Nebraska was in the 90s under Tom Osborne, but he's going to have them winning a lot of games again real soon. So let's get into the gist of the game. I thought the biggest takeaway for me, the biggest bright spot for Ohio State, if you will, might have been the return of the Ohio State run game, which is something that has been desperately missing from the Ohio State offense. On Saturday, they ran, Dobbins and Weber combined on 254 yards, 7.9 yards a carry. Kirk, at first glance, it seems like, whatever they did during the bye week may have worked. Was it scheme? Was it personnel? The incorporation of Wyatt Davis. What was it in your mind that had them running successfully on Saturday?
Hey, I think a lot of it was scheme. A lot of it was that they really focused on it during the bye week. I mean, they really had a physical bye week, which, when you lose to Purdue, it's about the worst time in the world to have a bye week, because you're going to get gutted. Bye weeks generally turn into training camp, which is not fun for the team. And when you come off a loss like that, I mean, I know Urban have been to some hamburger that weekend, but we it's one of those things where I think that JK got rolling and they got some confidence going, and guys were challenged, and it's not fun when everyone is on your case. Like the O-line was getting destroyed by fans and media, and you want to rectify that as fast as you can, because you don't want to be in the crosshairs of the fan base. And I think the O-line had some pride, and they came out and played well. And JK broke some long ones. Like when you break those long ones, nothing builds confidence like that, because when you have like some home run hitters like the guys we have, like Mike Weber and JK, then you give them a lane and they take it to the house. It's a backbreaker for the opposing defense.
I thought if there was, Ross, if there was, maybe one thing that was a little concerning about the run game is you could see within the play calling there was still a little bit of lack of confidence in those short yardage situations. I think twice where they had like 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2 situations, they didn't go to the run. Like one time I saw them go to like a little pop pass with Paris Campbell, and then they did a reverse, I think, on one play. So you can tell that there's still a little bit of hesitancy, a little bit of trepidation to run straight ahead, but it was a step in the right direction, at least, I thought.
Well, yeah, and I distinguish between, so the two plays that stick out to me that were really poor in short yardage were the lead outside zone to Paris Campbell, where he came into the backfield. The pop pass I'm actually personally good with, and I think that was a huge step, because what they were doing is they were getting pistol and sending that jet sweep motion away from the run play. And so when you don't have the quarterback to constrain the backside, the next best thing is to have that fly sweep that the backside has to contend with, because that'll keep those guys off the front side run. So to me, that's really the scheme was on the run game. They fixed the things they needed to fix, which was combining, as I said, getting more in pistol, running more to the front side, constraining the backside of the defense, and then in short yardage, using that jumbo diamond formation near the goal line to just get bodies in there.
I don't want this to come across as overly optimistic or overly rosy, because I know people are looking at this in a vacuum and saying, well, Ohio State only beat a 2-6 team by 5 points, But when you concentrate really on the things that Ohio State came into this game needing to improve upon, I thought Ohio State really did improve upon many of those things, if not most or all of them. Some of them were varying degrees. Obviously, the run game was a little better than maybe some of the defensive issues, but the defense didn't play poorly when you consider Nebraska came into this game averaging 520 yards. And really, it's my opinion that if not for those 3 straight turnovers, the 2 possessions to end the second quarter and then the first possession of the third quarter, if not for those 3 straight turnovers Ohio State had, which has not really been an ongoing issue for the Buckeyes, I kind of think Ohio State wins this game going away because the defense had been playing well enough to keep the offense in it. The offense had been playing pretty well when it wasn't turning the ball over. So for me, this game was actually somewhat encouraging, and we'll get to the defensive side here in a second. But, Ross, would you agree that, I think if you look at the big picture and then look at some of the things that they did in the course of this game, I think there's actually some hope to take away that maybe they can get better here down the stretch.
Yeah, those turnovers were huge, and this is continuing a trend. It's turnovers are one of those things that they have a huge determinant on the score and the outcome, but yet they're not very interesting to talk about in the post-game analysis because it's like, well, you had 3 turnovers, and that's bad. And there's not a ton to say about it because, particularly with fumbles, there's just some luck involved or bad luck. But, Ohio State, the same thing against Indiana, they're in a sort of, I think they have a negative turnover ratio for the year, which is obviously not good and very different than what they've had in the past. And so, yeah, that had a big impact. Throwing a pick in the end zone, Ohio State, other than those 2 drives in the beginning of the fourth quarter with some questionable play calling, they pretty much drove the ball the entire game. It was mostly turnovers that slowed them down.
Kirk, big picture, do you see Ohio State? They've got a really tough test this week. Michigan State, noon game on Fox, and Michigan State's defense, quietly, people haven't really been paying much attention, but they're playing like a top 10 defense now, so that's not going to be an easy game. But big picture with Michigan State and Michigan still on the schedule, do you see enough takeaways from this game that you think Ohio State can build off of what happened on Saturday?
I think there are takeaways. Obviously the offense, the running game is huge, especially on the road. And, our guys playing with some more confidence and our running backs, hitting holes and breaking some long runs. Really, I think that's going to bode well for Michigan State because Michigan State's a tough place to play. And, we got to figure out a way to get these guys charged up for noon games because we keep starting slow and it kills us. And we can't, you don't want to give a team like Michigan State hope because they're tough and they've been competitive with us. Other than last year, they're usually it's a pretty competitive game, and our guys really got to step up and play well on the road. This will be a good step to see where we're at after playing a Nebraska team that candidly wasn't. They were good, but they're not. They're 2-6. Like you are what your record says you are. So, Michigan State, I'm sure will have a tough plan for us, and their defense is always good against us, minus last year.
So I want to jump sides of the ball here. So Ross, I think the biggest thing that people noticed was the play of Brendan White after Jordan Fuller left the game, got ejected for that bogus targeting call. Which, by the way, by the letter of the law, that was correct. But that rule has no common sense in its application, and I was especially. You know what? I'm going to go off on a tangent here. I was especially upset at the non-call against the Nebraska defender against Johnny Dixon because basically the rationale for that is because he made a move, he became a runner, that therefore he wasn't defenseless. But when you're being dragged down by a tackler and basically stood up and a secondary tackler can come in and then launch on you, and it wasn't malicious, and I know he didn't do it on purpose, but the fact is his shoulder still went into the helmet. So, if that's not defenseless, I don't know what is. Ross, I'll give you a chance to respond to that because I've just, opened up this can of worms here. But that just irritates me. That rule has no common sense if that's how it's being applied.
Sure, I'll give my real quick, and then I can jump back to Brendan White. I honestly don't know when you're in Fuller's situation what you're supposed to do, other than I guess not hit him and just let him fall to the ground. And if he catches it, I guess that's it, because he's on there's nowhere to hit him when he's laying on the ground trying to catch the ball. That you're gonna have to lead with your shoulder pad down into him. It's honestly, I feel like it's a rule that's very outcome determinative. If it looks like a big hit, they're going to review it, and generally they're going to uphold targeting, even if the same hit happens on a different play. But in any event, yes, Brendan White was it was a breath of fresh air to see a safety who was willing to come up and tackle and generally be in the right spot. I thought he did pretty well in pass coverage too on third down on a lot of cover one man, and Nebraska was motioning to force him to be the safety in man coverage instead of the deep safety, and I thought he did a pretty nice job. And that's good to see. I mean, the secondaries had a host of issues, between both performance and continued injuries. I mean, they had 2 more secondary starters out yesterday, and Arnett had been out before that, so it's it would be a big step forward. I mean, I think Brendan White has to continue to play in some role after that performance.
Which begs the follow-up question. So, he came in for Fuller, but, the obviously going forward, Fuller is going to be the starter, and Fuller hasn't been the problem there in the back. So, do you think Brendan White, even though he doesn't have that prototypical size for playing the strong side in the safety role, do you think he can transition into that role? And follow-up question to that, if what we saw on Saturday is legit from him, why have not the coaches given him that shot to play quicker than they have? But you have any guesses on that?
So as to the first question, Fuller can play either side. In fact, they started the season wanting him to play to the field so that he could be more of the man coverage guy. And the problem was that teams were just killing us running to the boundary because Pryor and Went were so bad in run support that they had to flip him back. So you could certainly flip Fuller to the field. I think that raised the question if, maybe Wade and White rotate and then Wade can still play in the nickel. I think it remains to be seen a little bit. Heck, you could, I was just happy to see Brendan White tackle better, I think, than probably any of the linebackers. You could put him at Sam linebacker and probably accomplish something. But as to why he's not playing, Kirk could probably answer that better than me. I mean, frankly, sometimes guys just play better in games than they do in practice. And that's just sort of as old a story as life itself of football. Yeah. And, sometimes that's just how it works. There's a term Wally Pip for a reason.
Yeah, Kirk, Ross mentioned it. I mean, White was out there tackling he actually looked like he had football instincts, which is something that had been missing from a couple spots on this team this year. It was great to see have somebody have a nose for the ball and wrap up and make tackles like he was. I mean, he had 11 tackles, I think, in that game, considering he didn't play the entire game. You don't want your safeties having that many tackles generally, but a lot of the tackles he had was still, it was still impressive regardless.
Well, I know the thing about Brendan is sometimes you get a guy out there and he just takes advantage of his opportunity. I mean, it was a lot I talked about it earlier before we got on, and we put Troy out there, and the big thing with Troy was that coaches said that he didn't practice well or whatever. But then he gets out in the games and it's all of a sudden we can move the ball and we can pass the ball, and some guys are just elite gamers, and and some guys frankly they're great in practice, but I don't know if they get anxiety or if they just suck when the people show up and it's big time, or it's too much for them. I don't know, but some guys just don't play well in games. Some guys can be sweet in practice, and when it comes to time to actually produce, it's not quite as good. So it's I always I never get excited about what kids do until they actually play in games. It's practice stuff is great, because it kind of can give you a little bit of a notion of what's coming, but until they do it in front of, people in the world, then it doesn't really matter. And I'm glad a kid like Brendan got a shot, because, sometimes you never know, and then you plug a guy in and all of a sudden people are like, why hasn't he been playing? It's he doesn't practice good. Well, I don't care how guys practice. I want them, obviously you want guys to practice well and practice hard and all that, but it's you got to do it when the lights come on, because that's the only time they really keep score, and it's the only time that it really matters. There's guys that can be great in practice and give great effort in practice, but then, if you can't produce in the game, then you're basically worthless.
Yeah, I've always thought that sometimes coaches, and I understand why, you want to reward people for doing the little things throughout the week. But I think sometimes coaches do place too big an emphasis on what happens in practice. I mean, just from a standpoint of, like, if you see somebody has the ability, throw them out, especially if you're struggling at that position. Throw them out there and give them a shot, see what they can do when you, like you said, when the lights come on. And I'm not saying that's what happened in this case. We're kind of speculating a little bit. Maybe there are other reasons why he wasn't playing, but I've always thought in general that sometimes coaches can stick to that a little too much. Kirk, I'll stick with you. I thought Ohio State played a lot better. We've been talking for several weeks about how the defensive line has been kind of disappointing to some extent. They have not really controlled the line of scrimmage. I thought they did better against Nebraska, and I thought also the linebackers did a little bit better job, filling the gaps behind them. But, Nebraska had 184 yards rushing, but they only ran for 3.8 yards a carry. So, overall, Ohio State did, I thought, better up front than they had been in the last few weeks. What were your thoughts on the performance by the defensive line?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you. I thought that they stepped up in the face of what I thought was a tremendous scheme. I mean, you heard, Coach Meyer after the game, he's like, they're going to have a hell of a program, in a few years, because he's just like how I am. I was like, man, when he actually gets his guys, like when he goes down and gets like that Central Florida type skill, and that's not Central Florida's got some skill guys, and it's like he gets his type of guys, and he can go around the country right now and make calls recruiting and be like, do you see what we did against Ohio State? You see how much better we're getting, how we're progressing, and it's just something that his offense is going to be really hard to defend with these guys. So I thought our guys did a good job of filling gaps and playing sound. And, again, I think a lot of that was the bye week, because I know for a fact that the bye week emphasis was running the ball. And, when we were getting a little too Texas Tech-ish on offense and throwing it 73 times in a game, when you throw it that much, and you're throwing that much in practice, all of a sudden you can't run the ball as well, and you can't stop the run. That's the one thing that no one ever talks about. Is everyone's like, well, the running game's working. I'm like, well, yeah, so is stopping the run, because in practice it's just not like emphasized because we're throwing it so much. But, when you scrimmage and you're running the ball, and, we always had good run defenses when I played and early in Coach Meyer's tenure, because we were committed to running the football. And, when you run the ball and you're committed to it, then you're going to be running it in practice. And guess what? Your linebackers are going to figure out how to fill the holes, and your linemen are going to figure out how to play double teams and how to, do that type of stuff. And that's, I think it was, I know it was a big emphasis this bye week. And then we had an extra practice on Monday. And I think it all added up to, generally a better performance in the running game on both sides.
Yeah, Ross, when you watch this back with seeing scheme of Scott Frost in Nebraska, is your wife going to be jealous with how enthralled you are watching that?
It's tough. I mean, they're the full out. They are, it's funny because people around here have been like, there's been a lot of storm and drawing among Ohio State fans about like RPOs and like how they're used. Like Ohio State is like a baby in using RPOs compared to like Nebraska or even what Alabama is doing with Tua. And like, so it's just tough to defend. You were like talking about, the amount of tackles Brendan White had, but that was actually not as bad of a thing as it might seem traditionally, because Nebraska was spreading them out so much that, and then running to the field and then running back to the boundary. And so your boundary safety basically has to act like an extra linebacker in the box, or you're just never going to stop them. So that's why it was so good to see the safety actually come down and fill, like you've seen, those Michigan State cover 4 safeties do for years.
Yeah, so look, I don't want this to come across overly rosy, and I said this earlier, but, Nebraska was 2-6, and I understand that, but, as a gambling friend of mine, a guy that does this, for a living, by the way, he knows what he's talking about. He pointed this out to me when they were 0-6. He said, this Nebraska team is probably the best 0-6 team in the history of college football statistically. He said they're a lot better than they're being given credit for. He said this is one of those cases where the record probably does not do justice for Nebraska. Was not as bad as I think people think they are. And I think for Ohio State to struggle to beat this Nebraska team is not as much of an indictment as maybe it seems on the surface. But obviously, I want to look ahead now because it does change in terms of Ohio State has a legitimate opponent on the road that they've got to deal with this week. And we don't have to get too far into this preview, but, Ross, I will start with you. what do you think Ohio State has to do better or do what they have not been doing in order to come away with a win in East Lansing this week?
Well, to not be the most cliched answer in the world, not turn the ball over, score in the red zone, not give up big plays. I mean, Michigan State is a very good defense this year. They're back to playing traditionally how Michigan State plays. I think, they're one of the best run defenses in the country. So it will fully test how much our run game's improved. I think Ohio State needs, frankly, a little bit better performance out of Dwayne Haskins. He was pretty uneven at best yesterday, I would say. And then on defense, I think Michigan State has certainly struggled offensively. And so it's really a matter of just forcing them to drive the field. I mean, the one thing Ohio State did do yesterday, to your point, was largely force Nebraska to sustain drives.
Yeah, that's right. They mostly eliminated the big plays. I mean, there were a few of them sprinkled in, but I thought they did a better job of not giving up those easy touchdowns that they had been giving up in recent weeks. So I thought that was encouraging, that they forced a good offense to sustain drives. And to Nebraska's credit, Adrian Martinez is a really good quarterback. I actually think he's one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten right now, if not maybe he's not as good as Haskins throwing the ball, but man, he's really good. Kirk, there's an inclination to want to look ahead to that other team up north because of how well they're playing. I think they're the second best team in the country right now behind Alabama. But this Michigan State team is legitimately playing a lot better. As Ross said, defensively, they're playing like a top 10 team. Offensively, they're not very good. They've had a lot of injuries, but they're playing stifling defense. And suddenly this game is a real concern for Ohio State. What do you make of this going into East Lansing with the way the Spartans are playing and how Ohio State has done in recent weeks?
I just think given how, shoddy defense has been this year, I mean, every game is concerned. I mean, down the stretch, it's like, when you play Purdue and you lose 4 touchdowns, I mean, you can't really take anything for granted. And, Michigan State has, they've had their number and they've beaten, in my opinion, the best Urban Meyer team that he's had in 2015. They came down here and beat us. So it's like, you always got to be ready to go against these guys because, they'll be jazzed up. It's like they played poorly against Michigan. So this is like their other big time. I don't want to say it's like a true rivalry, but it's kind of turned into one just given how they've, they beat us in 13, they beat us in 15. Those were 2 really good teams that, had chances to win national titles. And, and last year, the biggest thing is last year we smashed them. So they've had a whole year to sit around and let that really marinate. And, if people, if you don't think revenge is a thing, you're an idiot because it's something that, those players were embarrassed, those coaches were embarrassed, and, they see us, kind of, I don't want to say limping into East Lansing, but we're not as dominant as we have been, and, we've been exposed, defensively. So I think it's going to be a huge game, and, it's just sometimes it's hard when you walk into like a sleepy noon game on the road. You're staying at a hotel in Ypsilanti, and these guys got to get jazzed up and ready to go, and they got to come out of the chute. So hopefully, we'll bring the running game up there, and our defense will shut them down. But it's going to be tough.
Yep, we are getting down the home stretch here. Michigan State, then Maryland, and of course the game on November 24th to end the regular season. And I don't have to tell you that is suddenly looking like a very formidable opponent. They're always formidable for Ohio State because you have to throw the records out the window. But especially this year, the way Michigan is playing, that will be interesting times. So we'll get into more of that, and I will preview Michigan State a little more in depth later this week. But that is going to wrap things up with Kirk and Ross here. Appreciate you guys joining. You can catch Kirk on Twitter at Kirk_Barton. And you can catch Ross on Twitter at Ross R. Fulton. Guys, I appreciate it, and we will talk again next week to recap Michigan State.
Absolutely, and I just have to mention real quick that the guy that does my parody account, it sucks. So whoever, if you ever, I know he probably doesn't listen to our podcast, but God, it's like not even funny. It's like if you're gonna make fun of me, at least be funny.
You should make that. You should make that.
He's like, yeah, it's just. It's garbage.
You should make that your weekly sign off there, Kirk.
Your birthday wish. Yeah, your birthday wish. A better
my birthday wish
account.
is that it's like I mean, I'm honored to have a parody account, but man, I just wish it didn't suck. It's like, God, such a cold fish. So
right.
It's all good, guys.
All right,
Thank you.
fellas, we will chat at you next week.
All right.
Sounds good. Thanks.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
Little bit of basketball talk here before we wrap the show up today, because Ohio State, as I mentioned at the top of the show, tipping off its season Wednesday night, 6 p.m. in Cincinnati, the renovated Fifth Third Arena, which was closed last year. Cincinnati had to play its games off of campus down at Northern Kentucky University. But it is, after being renovated, and basically they gutted the whole inside of the building, and now it's like this big bowl. It's like a traditional arena, as opposed it used to be the kind of the bleacher type seating that was elevated off the surface. But now it's like an actual traditional bowl. It's supposed to look really nice. And so Cincinnati is back on campus and playing its game, and this game is, last I checked, I think was really close to being sold out, if not being sold out. So expect a really large and energetic crowd for the reopening of Fifth Third Arena. And, I got to tell you, this is something that Cincinnati has had a lot of troubles with, and I think there are many reasons for it. It's kind of embarrassing how bad the attendance has been for Cincinnati home games here the past several years. I think some of it is because Mick Cronin's style is not very fun to watch. It's a very blue-collar, grinded-out physical style, so they don't score a lot of points. They've had some terrible non-conference schedules. You look at Cincinnati's non-conference schedules, and they've been putrid. Some of the worst in the country the last several years. They have the Savannah States and Florida A&Ms of the world coming in. Just not a lot of home games that really energize the basketball crowd down there in the tri-state area. So I think for a number of reasons, they've kind of alienated their fan base. But it's great to see, for both Ohio State and Cincinnati, this game taking shape. To kick off the season makes it just even more cool because of the circumstances, opening up the season and reopening Fifth Third Arena. I think this is going to be a very good atmosphere down there. I think it's going to be loud. There's going to be a lot of animosity. And these two teams are very similar. And if you look, across the board, they share a lot of common traits in that they both are young, inexperienced teams that are going to be defense first. Cincinnati, like Ohio State, Ohio State lost 3 out of their best 4 scorers, and Keita Bates-Diop, their best player, along with Jayshawn Tate and Cam Williams. Well, Cincinnati is in the same situation. They lost guard Jacob Evans last year, who was their leading scorer. Their second best player, actually probably their best overall player, Gary Clark, like Keita Bates-Diop. He averaged 13 points and almost 9 rebounds a game. He's gone, and their other double-digit scorer, their fourth leading scorer, Kyle Washington, another forward, kind of a 4-5 hybrid, they also lost him. So Cincinnati, which was not very good offensively last year to begin with, they've got a lot of offense to replace, and so they're in a situation last year, they were rated number 4 overall in the final Ken Pomeroy ratings, but they had the second best defensive efficiency adjusted for competition in the entire country. Well, you take away now some of their scorers, and I expect them to be a very good defensive club like Ohio State, but they're going to be very blue-collar, and it's going to be up to some of their young guys to step up and into a scoring role. The preseason Ken Pomeroy ratings, by the way, has Ohio State projected number 41, and Cincinnati is projected number 44. So these two teams are very similar. Only a half a point separates them in the projections, which means Cincinnati on its home floor should be a 2 to 2.5 or 3 point favorite at home on Wednesday. But we will see when the final spread comes out in another day or two, because that has not happened yet. So I'm just kind of projecting based on where the power ratings have these two teams. But should be very interesting. Two teams that are very much in a similar situation. They're both defense first, I think, coming into the season. So you're not going to see a lot of offensive fireworks in this game. To be perfectly honest, I'm not expecting it. But both teams trying to replace some of their best players from last year. I'm really excited about this, though. It should be a great, intense basketball game and a great way to start this off in the college basketball here in the state of Ohio, which brings me to one more point. You know where I'm going with this because I've said it so many times. Let's get some type of all-Ohio basketball event together. Let's make this happen. Put Ohio State, Cincinnati, Xavier, Dayton, and who knows, maybe you can sprinkle in some of the MAC teams or other teams out there. But let's get some kind of all-Ohio basketball showcase like the state of Indiana does, like the state of Iowa was doing for so long. Make this happen. Make this an annual event. Let's see these teams play regularly. Even if it's just, Ohio State and Cincinnati playing on an annual basis, that's great, and that's a start. But I would love to see this incorporate Xavier, Dayton, and some others. So we'll see what happens. Very excited for this game. But you can catch that, like I said, Wednesday, 6 p.m., ESPN2, Ohio State tips off its basketball season 2018-19 year at Cincinnati against the Bearcats. Should be a great game. Very much looking forward to it. Anyhow, that's going to wrap the show up today. Catch me on Twitter at KYLAM8. I will certainly be talking about this Ohio State basketball team this week. We will also preview Michigan State on Friday, as well as wrapping up Ohio State basketball. We'll preview Michigan State and Ohio State noon game on Fox at Michigan State in East Lansing. So we will be talking about that. And Mark Gibler, we have a recruiting update coming on Friday as well. As you may have missed it, Ohio State got another commitment, a running back commit from Miami, Trinity Christian. We will talk a little bit more about that on Friday. So big show coming up, lots to talk about. Hope you have a great week, everybody. You can catch the show Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com, on the archives, SoundCloud, Google Play, iTunes, and Stitcher. Hope everybody has a great week. Thanks for listening. We'll be back at you on Friday. Go Buckeyes.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.